as many things often do. All right, for Pete and Adam real quick. So, are there any circumstances in which you wouldn't film the police?
I mean, for me, no, not any. I mean, like I comment on Reddit, it's not courage, it's just the change of your mindset. I mean, filming police isn't wrong. The only reason why people don't film police is because they're afraid of going to jail. Sometimes an officer makes a mistake and does that, but I mean, they could just as easily make a mistake on who you are or anything else and end up taking you to jail. So it's just your mindset. Filming the police isn't wrong. I mean, you're paying for somebody to provide you a service, and if they're providing you a service in which I believe I don't like the service, I don't want to pay for the service. I wish the market would gauge what services I had to offer, because if the St. Louis North, South, East, or West Division of Police were beating me up, I could go and get the alternative to them that aren't beating people up, and I wouldn't have to pay for them. So never under any circumstances, if the cop isn't even doing anything wrong, I'm still filming them wrong per their rules. Cell phones are great. You can stop if you're walking to work or something like that. Snap a picture or at least video. I always like to ask people if I see them pull over, like, hey, do you want me to stick around and videotape? And some say yes, some say no. I respect the privacy of the individual. If I still think like the officer was yelling at them prior to, and then they still said no, like we were in New York City a couple weeks ago, one guy was like, I don't know really. He wouldn't give us a yes or no. The officer or something was like, tell him you don't want him to film. And then he's like, I don't want you to film. And I was like, okay, we're gonna hang around anyways. And because obviously there was something going on, and then the guy's like, well, I kind of do want you to film. So we went back and forth. But the officers tried to intimidate him. But in that case, I'd still say film, because otherwise I hear about it later that this guy gets jacked up by some cops I'm gonna wish I had, or if they start to rough him up, then you gotta pull your camera out and get it on, and you miss the start of it, and they have the argument of, well, you don't see what happened before. So, yeah, it's just the mindset. I mean, whether they're doing something wrong or about to or anything, I like to film them. The same thing I like to do is if the officers are doing something wrong, arresting somebody for like a victimless crime, I like to let them know about it. Like, would you do this to your own children? Would you do this to, somebody else? Like, what is the reason? And you start asking them some of those questions, and you'd be astonished at some of the responses you get. I mean, I've had officers tell me, like, I'm doing my job, and I'd say, okay, well, if your job was to arrest people with blankets, would you arrest people with blankets? And they tell me, yeah. I mean, if we don't want it to get to that point, we got to do something now. And these things, I mean, this is the camera I first started filming police with, which is what I brought up here. It's got a crack in it. It's it's probably like $90 on eBay right now, if that. And I mean, it's that easy. You turn it on and you're ready to go. But cell phones are great. I mean, they got the smartphones. Yeah, I recommend a program called Quick. You can live stream right to the internet, so I could be filming everybody, and it would go onto as soon as someone shuts this phone off, it's on quick.com, QIK, and like the case in Mississippi would have never happened if I had Quick, because they deleted that footage, and even though they would have shut off my camera, they would have actually put it online and in a safe spot for me, where you have a whole nother ball game for police to go into a corporation like Quick and get your password and then get to delete your footage. That's a whole new realm.
Can I make a quick comment? You made me think of something. I'm kind of just waking up, long week, long day. There is another residual impact, I believe, that we may see as a result of the videotaping that we've seen kind of increase in the last 5-10 years. Police culture on paper, our policies are solid in terms of how we're supposed to treat people. You're trained in a particular way. You receive a limited amount of training in terms of diversity and how to interact with people who are from different cultures and things, but at least the effort is made. So formally, training-wise, you usually find a department in pretty good shape, but it's the culture. It's once I leave the academy and get to the street, that street officer, that veteran is telling me the first thing out of his mouth, forget everything you learned at the academy, we're getting ready to show you how to do this. And this is where you see the corruption and the abuse introduced into what's going on. Videotaping helps those officers who are more than you may imagine in number, who disagree with some of these officers are doing. It empowers them, I think, to challenge those officers who perpetuate that kind of a culture by saying, look, you're getting us caught up, or at least you're being exposed for what you're doing, and I don't have to stand here in isolation and be the lone wolf Serpico trying to call you out. And I think that one of the residual effects that we're going to see over time, not overnight, but over time, is that more and more law enforcement officers like Dan Isom and others are going to be calling for more and more widespread use of video cameras within their departments and more adherence to their stated policies in terms of how police interact with citizens.
Well, I kind of disagree with that. I think they're going to call for more cameras, but they're going to be controlled by them. And I also think that though the camera might essentially help some officers that are willing to stand up and speak, like copblock.org has had probably 3 or 4 officers that are on forces throughout the country contact us and say like, oh, I love what you guys are doing, I want to help, and I put this on my officer's radar. But ideally, I think the camera is ultimately going to let people realize that the monopoly on force or protection that the police have is the problem. Everybody in this room can go out and film police for the rest of their lives. If you don't end that, you're still going to have the same thing because there's still a lack of accountability. In Pensacola, Florida, an officer clearly chased down a 17-year-old kid for biking by a construction zone, clearly tried to tase him from his moving vehicle, clearly ran him over and almost cut him in half. He then planted a gun on him and had a trial, and this guy ended up, the internal investigation of cops investigating cops turned out that this officer didn't do anything wrong, that the rules in which police officers operate by were that he followed those and ended up getting an 80-hour paid vacation. I mean, and that was all on camera, and that was actually even on their camera.
And he went to court with that video evidence and lost that case?
No, it never went to court as a criminal aspect. I think the city, or excuse me, the victim's family is in the process of suing the court.
Yeah.
But then that officer isn't accountable. That's taxpayers, like, you know.
Well, he's not accountable at that point. But at some point, I mean, if we get evidence like that here in St. Louis, I think we're going to make a pretty strong case, and that officer will ultimately be held accountable for what he's doing.
This officer.
I think we're agreeing. I don't disagree with anything you've said, but I think that my point was keep exercising your rights to create these objective records, and hopefully across the country we're going to see more and more people, it looks like, doing the same thing, because it does position those who are in law enforcement who want to see the change on firmer ground, because it's a difficult culture to challenge. A lot of times here in St. Louis and across the country, the worst assholes are the most vocal and dominate the culture in the locker room and the public presentation of the police perspective. I mean, every time something kicked off in St. Louis there for about 5 years, they would go straight to the Police Officers Association, and Gary Wiegand would make some statement that I knew didn't reflect the views of everybody on the department, but it was presented as the universal point of view of police officers, and it's just not true. So I think, you know, when we see officers get exposed the way they've been getting exposed, it helps those other ones to say, hey man, we can make our move now, because these guys cover the narrative of just being good guys doing difficult work who never make mistakes. That cover has been blown.
Has anyone here heard of a 1983 civil rights action?
I have.
Yeah, 1983 civil rights action is essentially an action that lets you sue a police officer as an individual, strips away qualified and official immunity from him, and you can sue him for deprivation of your constitutional rights. The other interesting thing about that law is that it lets you, is that once you sue someone under that, with that law, they have the government, the state government, the local government, the police officers association can't pay their bills. They have to pay their own legal bills. And a couple attorneys I know have begun using these lawsuits in federal court against, in rather serious cases of police misconduct, where the IA investigation came back and said that these people acted appropriately. I mean, I foresee that it will become a very meaningful tool for people like us, I guess.
We're going to attempt to sue the Mississippi police officers under 1983, but there's also, this is all legal mumbo jumbo for the lawyers to hash out, but they're like protected through some other law in Mississippi. But so we have to challenge that on top that law isn't constitutional as well, and it's a real mess. Not to mention, they have like a 90-day letter that you're going to sue them, and then 90 days after they get that letter, you can sue them, and it's just a tedious process.
Very briefly, if one of you could explain what does a police officer have to do to be able to be sued under a 1983 Civil Rights Act? Because I would imagine it would have to be something to do with, you know, a racial discrimination or, you know.
I think it's just a violation of your constitutional rights. I don't think it is what it is. Yeah, it's just
deprivation of any rights, privileges, or immunity secured by the Constitution.
Right. So, like for me in the Mississippi case, it was my right as a member of the press to film in a public area and and for Pete it was the illegal search of his home and things like and the length of detainment in which they detained him for. So both of those issues.
Julia?
Yes, in your travels or through the crop walk, have you noticed an actual difference in areas where cops are generally, you're prohibited from filming cops versus areas where you actually are allowed to film cops?
Well, there's definitely some police officers are much more used to it. We come from Keene, New Hampshire, and there's a lot of activists up there, and they don't even question it. You can be filming them.
You can put a camera in their face like this, and they're fine with it.
But at the same time, to answer the previous question, would there be a time you would never film a cop? I would say yes. I mean, because I have had some very candid, deep conversations with people that are cops, and I feel like if I was filming them, they may be more reserved. If I could talk to them as a person and maybe communicate some of these ideas or plant a seed or give them a resource, maybe that has a longer lasting effect. We've kept up email correspondence with some police officers.
Sure. But when I gave my answer, I meant while they're on duty in a patrol car on the streets, there's never a time where I wouldn't film a cop if I had enough time and whatever. But in private life, I'm just not mic'd up to film a cop at all times like that. So.
It is to film a cop. Sometimes it can be intimidating, especially your first time. These are authority figures, and they may tell you things that aren't legal, and they say are. You have to do this or whatever. And it's good to have a support community around you. I don't know if all y'all know each other here. Hopefully, there's some good liberty-oriented people that will support each other. But there is a great community up in New Hampshire. I know I keep hyping it up, but again, if I could real quickly to bring it back, I mean, filming folks that purport to work for you is good, but at the end of the day, if every police action were filmed, if there were civilian review boards, if there are all these mechanisms in place to try to check the abuse of authority, it's not going to be as good as if this good or service were provided by the market. Because you said you work with people that are heavy-handed or maybe corrupt or whatever, but ideally, if I was a company that provided law enforcement or security, I would have an incentive not to hire them because they're going to be a liability. It's going to reduce the morality of my department and all these or my company. So these folks, these bad apples wouldn't even be there, and the fact that most folks wouldn't choose to pay to enforce victimless crime laws to say, hey, this guy has a joint in his pocket, I'm going to steal your money so I can put him in a cage. Most people are going to say, I don't really think that makes sense. So the fact is, the folks that are law enforcers or peacekeepers, they're not going to be doing all these things that erode respect for them in the first place.
I hear what you guys are saying about the marketplace, man, but my practical experience and the reality of privatizing law enforcement is usually the curve turns worse. I mean, think Blackwater. When you contract out these kinds of services, they take the government out of it. We've even got private security companies right here in St. Louis that patrol right in this area, Central West End, but all of those guys are St. Louis police officers. And they're trying to really move in the same direction as the police department sometimes when it comes to how they treat people on the street. Yeah. I'm sorry.
The problem with that, sorry, I thought he said, the problem with that is because these private security people that you have maybe patrolling this area, they're still competing with someone that gets their money no matter what. So how do I get more competition if, I can get this service for free, why am I going to pay for this private thing? If you got rid of the free service altogether, then you would have 10 companies to choose from. You're not going to choose the one that sucks, basically. So as long as you have that monopoly, still, our views of what privatizing police would be can't really come to fruition.
Hold on just one second. I saw this guy's hand up a while back. We'll get to Damien.
So I got a question for the ACLU guy. I'm sorry, I'm back with names. Redditt. Okay. What is your experience as a former police officer and ACLU advocate with the number of actual filed police brutality, misconduct, and the actual number? I mean, is it 1 to 10, 1 to 5? I know there's